joining us now, and I've just given you some of his background. It's quite a distinguished background before entering Parliament. I have enormous amount of empathy, in actual fact, for somebody who writes and produces and publishes books, having done so myself. And then entering into politics, obviously did much better than I did because he gained the confidence of his ministers, and now he is a minister of just about everything, Paul Goldsmith, including broadcasting, which we'll talk about, treaty negotiations, and arts, culture, and heritage. I imagine they looked down and said, "Who's written a book?" And went, "Yes, Goldsmith has. Right, make him Minister of Arts, Culture, and Heritage." The Minister, Paul Goldsmith, joins us now. Paul, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you on, Minister.
Always a pleasure.
Listen, that was fascinating that you had a writing career beforehand. Did you make money out of that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I created my own little niche. It was sort of writing biographies of successful business people and companies, and I enjoyed it very much.
You weren't tempted to publish it yourself, I see.
Well. No, I mean, they were. I mean, some of them were published by the big publishing companies.
Well, you've got
Penguin
the
and
big one
Random
there,
House
Penguin.
and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's very impressive.
I mean, I think generally when we think of our history as a country, we focus on all sorts of things, but how we actually made our living and how we grew companies that exported and provided opportunities is an important part of our history, and underdone somewhat. And I set about trying to rectify that. And one of these days, when I come a cropper in politics, I'll go back to writing books.
Well, listen, you'll be fascinated because you'll be the right person to write. I mean, obviously an autobiography, the inner workings of government and of cabinet. I mean,
Yes, well.
it's about time we had one of those books, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the former Prime Minister has just published a book, hasn't she, in the last couple of days?
Wow,
But I'm not sure how
yes.
illuminating
I
it
don't
was,
think
but
that had reached
time
that
will tell.
definition, do you?
Yes. Well, we know how it ended.
Well, in actual fact, and it wasn't
shambles.
written for
A
New
shambles
Zealand
that we're having
audience.
to fix up right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no question. Hey, listen, mate. Listen, what I wanted to talk to you about was public broadcasting in general. Can I say that there is a concern amongst many people who would be supporters of the centre-right coalition, whether National National New Zealand First or ACT, that our public broadcasters are essentially the unofficial opposition of New Zealand, and that Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand, state-funded, are dominated by left liberal elements that routinely demonstrate and exhibit their political bias. And that obviously was a concern that led in part to the latest takeover of the New Zealand Herald and the construction of editorial board to offer a great deal more balance into that particular organisation. Have you ever considered that for Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand as well?
Not directly. Look, I think. I mean, you raise a whole heap of issues. I was, funnily enough, spoke at the centenary celebrations of Radio New Zealand last night, and they kicked off in 1925, and I made the point that look, there's always a tense relationship between governments and the media, and I think that's fair and appropriate. Ultimately, a strong and effective fourth estate is an important part of our democracy, and while you're in government, you don't particularly like getting asked difficult questions and being put under pressure. But I wouldn't want the other side to be in government and not face that kind of pressure, because it's important.
I don't discern that the last government...
No politicians like this, but it's a bit like a farmer complaining about the weather. A politician has to deal with the media and figure out a way to succeed regarding that. But the point you make is that there's always a debate about do people get a fair go or not, and so what levers do I have to pull as minister? Well, I send a letter of expectations to both RNZ and TVNZ as Minister, and in the latest versions that I've just sent, I've been very clear in terms of, there are two things that we are very much interested in, and one, for Radio New Zealand particularly, is audience, because that's basically a measure of how successfully they're connecting with a broad range of New Zealanders, and secondly, measures of trust. And that overall trust has actually fallen substantially, not just for them, but right across the board. And it was down about 49% or something like that. And they had a measure to increase it to, might have been 53 or 55%. And I wrote back and said, well, sorry, that's just not ambitious enough. You need to be aiming much higher. So they need to be very much focused on that. And so that's the primary lever I pull.
Okay. But as I said, New Zealand Herald has just been taken over, and one of your compatriots, Stephen Joyce, has just ended up as chair of that particular board. And one of the things that they've suggested to ensure a more appropriate editorial balance is to set up an editorial board that will ensure that all voices in New Zealand can be heard. Now, I would have thought that was even more important for Radio New Zealand, a state broadcaster that aspires to speak to all New Zealanders too. Would you agree?
Well, yes. Having a broad reach and broad trust is important, and so how you bring that about. The various different ways to do that. So, let's see how NZME, their structure works. And they're obviously a private company; they can do what they want. So the challenge I've put through to RNZ and TVNZ is, how are you going to lift those levels of trust? What's your plan? Have
you received a reply yet,
accountable for making
Minister? Have you received a reply?
Yes, that's part of the ongoing conversation. But yes, they've received the letter and they agree that they need to do more in that space. My role as a minister is to say, well, what's your plan, and let's do that. Being very clear that the legislation is very clear that as a minister I can't interfere in decision making, editorial decision making. So you've got to go about that in a careful way.
I assume, though, that you can say, I'd like to think that Radio New Zealand, funded wholly by the New Zealand taxpayer, to the tune of $63 million a year, is going to be representative of all New Zealanders in terms of its editorial content and in terms of its presenters, isn't it? I mean, isn't that just sort of...
Yeah, no, that's a reasonable expectation, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well... so I'll be interested to hear how that conversation turns out, because it's certainly not the case at the moment. Listen, the other thing is, as you say, their audience has dropped off a cliff. Now, it's still a sizable audience, but they are now the 8th rated radio show in New Zealand, when 5 years ago they were number 1. What do you think that precipitous decline is based upon?
Well, look, there are a couple of things going on. I think that they have had a big focus on growing their digital audience and their app, and and they can tell a very good story on that. And their app has been very successful, and a larger group of New Zealanders than ever before are accessing their content. So I think that's been successful, and we should recognise that. But in the process, it appears that they haven't given sufficient attention to maintaining that live audience in competition with other voices. And so, my very strong signal, and the message that we send is, we expect them to do better, and have a plan to win back some of those audiences. And to do that, then you obviously need to ask the basic question: well, why are people tuning out and going elsewhere? And rectify that and come up with different solutions.
Can I ask, though, is there really a place in 2025 when there's a multiplicity of news and opinion outlets never conceived about from 100 years ago, 1925 in comparison, as to why we need a public broadcaster at all?
Well, look, why I was never really supportive of the TVNZ and RNZ merger, I think yes, there's all sorts of sounds, but in terms of professional journalism entities and traditional strong newsrooms, we don't have that many, and I think the more we have, the better in that sense. So I don't think there's a very good argument for reducing the number of points of view and outlets. The private sector is under enormous pressure. So I do think there's a good argument for ensuring that there continues to be the state broadcaster that there has been. TVNZ, of course, it's owned by the government. It's not particularly funded by the government. Most of their funding is through commercial advertising, and they get a bit from New Zealand On Air, but primarily the goal is that that's a company that looks after itself and actually pays a dividend to the government. But our interest there is in ensuring that that amongst all the noise and the wonderful kaleidoscope of entertainment that New Zealanders can access from around the world, that they still have access to a strong New Zealand set of content as well, which is what people want and expect.
No, if people wanted it, they'd be listening to it, but they're not. They're the eighth rated radio station in New Zealand.